My name is Madison Taylor, and I'd like to start this story by saying I've found peace. That the past is just a memory, and there are no resentments. But that would be a lie. The truth is, though I've built a life I love, with an amazing fiancé, Caleb, and a career I'm proud of, the scars of my family's treatment are still here. Some wounds heal, others just hide. When I received the message from my mother, something inside me knew nothing had changed. Dear Madison, we need to talk. It's about Savannah's wedding. It's very important to us that you attend. I knew what was coming. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was a request. Maybe it was for money, maybe for effort. It didn't matter. The dynamic with the Hensons has always been like this. I gave, they took. So why did I hesitate? Perhaps because even after everything, a part of me still wanted to believe there could be something more. But let me go back to the beginning. When I was 2 years old, I was adopted by the Hensons. James and Eleanor were a seemingly ordinary couple who, at the time, struggled with infertility. For a few years, it seemed like I was enough. There weren't excesses, but there was stability, and that was more than I had known in the orphanage. Everything changed when I was 4. My mother became pregnant. Savannah was born, and suddenly I became invisible. It wasn't direct abandonment. There weren't cruel words or deliberate actions. It was a subtle yet constant distancing. I noticed it in the little things. Like when Savannah cried and I was sent to my room because she needs attention. Or at birthdays when her gifts were new and mine seemed rushed. The biggest sign, however, came when I overheard my father, unaware I was near, saying to someone on the phone, "Adopting Madison was necessary back then, but now it seems unnecessary." Growing up with that was like living in a constant state of expectation. I expected things to change. I expected them to see me, but that never happened. Savannah, my biological sister on paper, but never in heart, seemed to follow in our parents' footsteps. As children, she made sure to remind me that I wasn't really part of the family. "You came later," she'd say, as if that explained everything. As we grew older, she became the center of the universe while I was the inconvenient reminder of what the Hensons no longer needed. When I turned 18, I finally left home. There were no emotional goodbyes or pleas for me to stay. Just a brief wave and a silence that I would carry with me for years. I restarted my life in another city. I studied, worked, built a career. I met Caleb, who changed everything. He was calm, patient, and so different from anything I had known. With him, I discovered what it was like to be truly loved, not because I was useful, but because I was myself. But as much as I tried, the ghosts of the past were still there. And they returned in full force when Savannah announced her wedding. My mother was the first to contact me. The tone was sugary, almost manipulative. "Madison, you know how much this means to us all. It's a chance to be together again." Together again? We were never truly together. Still, I agreed to hear what she had to say. Not because I believed in a change, but because no matter how hard we try to escape it, there's something in us that always seeks approval. The call was long, filled with platitudes about family and new beginnings. But in the end, it was clear. They needed financial help. Savannah wanted a lavish wedding, and the expenses were beyond what they could afford. My mother was careful in her request, but the message was clear. I was needed. "Madison, you know how much it would mean to Savannah to have your support. It's a chance to show her we're a united family." I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to say no immediately, but another part, the one that still hoped for something different, made me hesitate. I agreed to think about it. When I told Caleb, he listened patiently, as he always did. "Madison, you don't owe them anything," he said, holding my hand. "But if this is something you need to do to find peace, I'll be here." Peace. That word echoed in my mind in the following days. Would helping my family be the first step to fixing something that had been broken for so long? Or was this just another cycle of manipulation? It was a difficult decision, but in the end I agreed to help. Maybe this is the beginning of something better, I told myself, trying to believe. But as the wedding day approached, I began to realize nothing had changed. Savannah remained distant, cold, as if I were a stranger. The invitations were sent, and my name wasn't on the list. When I questioned my mother, the answer was like a punch to the stomach. "Well, Savannah feels it would be best to keep the wedding intimate. Just the closest family." Closest family. That's when I realized I would never be seen as part of this family. They wanted my money, my effort, but not me. What I would do next would change everything. After the conversation with my mother, I sat on the couch for a long time, processing what I had just heard. They truly believed they could exclude me and at the same time expect my help. Caleb entered the room and sat beside me, handing me a cup of tea. He knew that look, a mixture of anger and disappointment. "What happened now?" he asked with his usual calm voice. "Savannah decided the wedding is just for close family," I said, letting out a bitter laugh. "But of course my money is close enough." He didn't respond immediately, just held my hand. "You have to decide how far this goes," he finally said. He was right. However painful it was time to draw a line. The next day my mother called me again. I answered only because I needed to hear what else she had to say. "Madison, I hope you've had time to reflect," she began, with that gentle voice she used when trying to appear conciliatory. "I know Savannah was a little insensitive, but you know how she is. She just wants everything to be perfect." "Perfect for whom?" I asked. "For the family," my mother quickly replied, as if it were obvious. "And that's why your help is so important. She needs you." I almost let out a cry of frustration. "She needs me? How exactly?" "Because so far, all she's made clear is that I'm not part of this." My mother sighed. "Madison, she's still your sister. And you know that people don't always understand what's best for them. And I suppose excluding the only person financially helping is her idea of perfection?" This time she hesitated. "She just needs time. You know how these things are." I laughed, not because I found it funny, but because it was all so absurd that there was no other possible reaction. "No, Mom. I don't know how these things are. Because I've never had a perfect moment with you all." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Madison," she began, but I interrupted her. "You asked me to help and I did, even knowing it meant nothing to you. But now I'm starting to see it never did." I hung up before she could respond. Later that night, Savannah sent me a message. It was short, direct, and as cold as I expected. "Heard you're causing trouble. If you don't want to help, just say so, but don't make things any harder." I didn't know if I was more irritated or hurt. This was my sister. Someone who should, at the very least, acknowledge what I was trying to do. I told Caleb everything, who listened patiently. He waited until I finished before speaking. "They're not going to change, Madison. You can continue helping, but that won't change who they are, or what you mean to them." His words were true but hard to hear, because deep down I knew he was right. Still, something inside me wanted to continue, wanted to prove I was better than them. So I continued helping. I contributed the remaining payments and arranged some final details. My mother sent messages almost daily, thanking me in generic ways, while Savannah remained silent. It was only the week of the wedding that the complete truth came out. I was confirming with my mother that all the vendors were ready when I casually asked about the seat reserved for me. "Well, Madison, about that." She hesitated, and I already knew what was coming. "You don't think you deserve a place at the wedding, do you?" Savannah's voice emerged from the background, cold and mocking. I froze. "Savannah, you're not part of our family," she continued, completely ignoring the shock in my voice. "You only helped because they asked you. That doesn't mean you're welcome." My mother tried to intervene, but it was too late. I had already heard everything I needed to. "I understand," I said, hanging up the phone. That night, as Caleb tried to comfort me, something inside me shifted. I had been used and discarded one last time. "They can't keep doing this," he said. "And they won't," I replied, my voice filled with determination. That's when I made my decision. No matter how much it cost me emotionally, I wouldn't let this injustice pass. They thought they could use me as a disposable piece, but not this time. What came next was the beginning of a turn of events they would never forget. The next day was like waking up after a storm. Everything was quiet, but I felt the tension in the air. I knew I couldn't just let what happened go. They thought they could manipulate me and then discard me, but this time I wouldn't be silent. Caleb was in the kitchen making coffee when I entered. "So what's the plan?" he asked, handing me a cup.
I looked at him, still trying to organize my thoughts. "I'm going to do exactly what they don't expect. I'm going to take back everything I gave them. No money, no support. If they think they can exclude me, Then let's see how they manage without my help. He smiled, leaning against the counter. I'm with you, whatever the path. With that, I started acting. I spent the morning making calls and sending emails. One by one, all the contracts I had signed for Savannah's wedding were canceled. The luxurious venue? Canceled. The sophisticated buffet? Canceled. The flowers she so desperately wanted? Canceled. Some companies resisted, saying they couldn't return the deposits. I didn't care. Losing some money was a small price to pay for regaining my dignity. When everything was done, I sat back and waited. I knew the chaos wouldn't be long in coming. My mother was the first to call. Her voice was filled with panic. Madison, what did you do? The wedding venue called saying it was canceled. And the flowers. And the buffet. What's happening? I kept my voice calm but firm. I canceled everything. You don't need my help, right? After all, I'm not close family. Madison, please, you can't do this. Savannah is devastated. Devastated because she can't use someone she despises anymore? I'm sorry, Mom, but I'm done. You wanted to exclude me, and now you'll deal with the consequences. She tried to argue, but I hung up. It wasn't long before Savannah entered the fray. She sent me a series of angry messages, each one more bitter than the last. You're pathetic. I can't believe you're trying to ruin my wedding. You're just proving you were never part of our family. I read each message calmly before deleting them all. Responding would be giving her more than she deserved. That same day, Caleb suggested we go out to dinner. You need a break, he said, holding my hand. Let's leave this drama behind, at least for today. I agreed, and that's exactly what we did. For a few hours, I managed to forget everything and focus on what truly mattered. Us two and the future we were building together. But the silence didn't last long. The next day, I received another call from my mother. This time, she seemed less desperate and more frustrated. Madison, you don't understand what you're doing. This wedding is important for our family. For Savannah's reputation. You can't just destroy everything because you're hurt. I didn't destroy anything, Mom. You did that yourselves. I just stopped helping. You need to get over this. Savannah is your sister. That's what families do. They overcome their problems and move on. True families, maybe. But you've made it clear my whole life that I'm not part of this. She tried to argue, but again I hung up. The days that followed were a mix of chaos and silence. I learned from acquaintances that Savannah was desperate, trying to reorganize everything at the last minute. She managed to find another venue, but it was smaller and more expensive. The vendors demanded extra payments due to the short notice. Each decision increased her debt, and I knew she was starting to feel the weight of it all. Caleb asked me one night if I regretted it. I thought for a moment before answering. No. For the first time, I'm setting boundaries. I'm showing them they can't use and then discard me. Maybe this will make them think twice before treating someone like that again. He smiled. That's what I love about you. You're finally fighting for yourself. The week of the wedding, I received a message from Savannah. Unlike the previous ones, this one wasn't filled with anger. Instead, it was short and bitter. I hope you're happy. You managed to destroy everything. I looked at the message for a moment before deleting it. I felt no guilt, just a sense of closure. The wedding day arrived, and while Savannah and my mother rushed to save what they could, Caleb and I were far from it, enjoying a weekend together. He suggested we go to the beach, and I accepted. As I felt the wind on my face and listened to the waves crashing, I realized that, for the first time, I was at peace. But this was just the beginning. The real consequences were yet to come. Savannah's wedding happened, but it was far from the fairy tale she planned. I learned from acquaintances that the event was a disaster. The smaller venue made guests uncomfortable, the improvised buffet served cold food, and the last-minute flowers didn't match the decor. It was everything Savannah never wanted, a social catastrophe. But the real impact came later. Savannah was deep in debt. The loans she took out to cover extra costs were starting to weigh her down, and she knew she couldn't repay them alone. It wasn't long before I started getting messages and calls again. Madison, please, we need to talk, my mom said in a voicemail. Her voice sounded tired, maybe even desperate. Savannah, on the other hand, had no remorse whatsoever. When I finally had Caleb answer a call from her, all he heard was an accusatory tone. Your fiancé needs to stop being so petty. She can fix this if she wants to. Caleb, always patient, calmly replied, Savannah, Madison has done more for you than you deserve. I think you should handle this yourself. He hung up before she could respond, turning to me. If you want to fix this, Madison, fix it. But I hope you know you don't have to. And I knew. For the first time, I truly knew. In the days that followed, my parents tried everything to convince me. Messages blaming Savannah, messages blaming me, pleas for family unity. One stood out. Madison, we need to leave the past behind. You have the chance to be the older sister Savannah needs. The irony was almost comical. The same family that spent years ignoring me now wanted me to take on the role of savior. I didn't respond. It wasn't until Savannah made a drastic decision that the situation truly changed. I learned from a third party that she tried to sue my parents, claiming they should be responsible for covering the wedding costs. When I read that, I couldn't help but laugh. Savannah was willing to drag everyone down with her, and they were finally feeling what I had endured my whole life. My mom, trying to salvage what was left of the situation, called me again. This time, her voice sounded defeated. Madison, things are out of control. Savannah is going too far. She's hurt, and so are we. Don't you think this has gone far enough? No, Mom, I replied, my voice firm. What you're facing now are the consequences of your choices. For years, you used and ignored me. Now it's your turn to understand what it's like to be discarded. She tried to protest, but I hung up. Caleb was in the room, watching me with a quiet smile. You're finally letting all of this go, he said. And he was right. That night, we did something simple. We cooked together, laughed, watched a movie. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of my family lift off my back. But there was one final twist. Days later, Savannah sent an unexpected message. It was short, direct, but different from the others. You betrayed me, it read. I should have been tougher on you. I hope you never need us, because we won't be there. I deleted the message without replying. For the first time, I felt nothing. No pain, no anger. Just relief. The contrast was clear. Caleb was my true family. He had chosen to stand by my side, while the Hensons only tolerated me when convenient. And now, finally, I was free from this toxic dynamic. As I looked ahead, I knew my story with them had come to an end. But it wasn't a sad ending. It was a fresh start. The following days were surprisingly calm. No calls, no messages. It was as if Savannah and my parents finally understood that I wouldn't back down. For the first time in years, there wasn't that constant weight of expecting the next emotional attack or manipulation. I focused on what truly mattered. Caleb and I started making plans for our wedding. It wouldn't be extravagant, but it would be exactly what we wanted. A day surrounded by people who truly loved us. But even amidst this tranquility, the impact of my family's actions continued to unfold. I learned from acquaintances that Savannah couldn't maintain the facade of her perfect life for long. Her debts started piling up, and with them came the collection agencies. She had to sell many of the wedding gifts and even some personal items to avoid losing what little she had. My parents were also facing their own battles. Savannah, who had always been the favorite, had now become a liability. Their mistakes were costing them dearly, not just financially, but emotionally as well. One day, while Caleb and I were organizing boxes in the apartment, I received an unexpected message. It was from my mom. Madison, we're losing control. I don't know what to do with Savannah anymore. I know we messed up with you, but I need you to know that we always loved you, even if we didn't show it. I'm asking, as a mother, that you consider helping us. Not for us, but because I know you're better than this. I stared at the message for a long time. Caleb entered the room and noticed my silence. What's wrong? He asked. I showed him the message, and he read it silently before returning the phone. What do you want to do? I knew that was my mother's last desperate attempt to draw me back into the dysfunctional family dynamic. For a moment, I considered responding, but then I realized it wouldn't change anything. I'm not responding, I said with a calmness that surprised me. I'm done. And with that, I deleted the message. In the following months, I continued to hear fragments about their situation. Savannah was sinking further, while my parents desperately tried to help her. But eventually, even those updates faded away. And honestly, I was okay with that. True liberation came on my wedding day. As Caleb and I exchanged vows, I looked around and saw the faces of friends and people who had chosen to be a part of my life. There was no room for resentment or pain that day. It was all about love, choices, and a brighter future. Later, as Caleb and I danced under the soft lights of the reception, he held me close and whispered, "You did it. You freed yourself." And he was right. For the first time in my life, I no longer carried the weight of the Hensons. But the biggest lesson from all of this wasn't just about liberation. It was about learning. I learned that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's about the people who choose you. I learned that it's possible to leave the past behind, even when it tries to pull you back. If you also feel trapped in a toxic family dynamic, I want you to know that there's a way out. It was a long and painful process for me, but it was possible. One of the most helpful tools that helped me overcome this cycle was the ebook, Dealing with Family Secrets and Resentments, a guide to overcoming conflict. It gave me clarity to understand my emotions, the toxic patterns, and most importantly, how to free myself from them. If you're ready to begin your own journey of liberation, I recommend exploring this resource. It might be the first step to finding the peace you deserve. And with that, my story with the Hensons came to an end. It wasn't the ending I expected as a child, but it was the ending I needed. And sometimes that's enough.
Hi, you are on the Moving Narratives channel. Subscribe and follow our stories.